Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to hold your breath because what I'm about to say might shake you to your core, might rattle your conscience, and might just awaken a spirit inside you that's been sleeping for far too long, because somewhere in a golden ballroom under crystal lights and the gaze of powerful men, a voice echoed that chilled the air and silenced even the loudest whispers. Donald Trump, bold as thunder and calm as a whisper, leaned back in his leather chair and said, "Can someone arrange a dance by Muslim girls?" And just like that, the world froze, because this wasn't just a statement. This was a test, a reflection, a challenge to identity, to respect, to the very soul of those who carry centuries of tradition, dignity, faith, and resilience in their eyes. And while cameras turned off and the room stayed quiet, one girl, yes, just one, rose without moving a step. And with her silence, she shook the world more than any rhythm could. Because, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the most powerful dance is the one where your feet don't, but your soul stands tall. And that silence echoed through the bones of the powerful, because in that moment, the air didn't carry music, it carried meaning. It carried message. It carried the weight of centuries, where Muslim women weren't just symbols of modesty, but warriors of wisdom, queens of patience, architects of empires. And now, faced with a question designed to reduce their essence to entertainment, they stood still and burned brighter than stage lights ever could, because that one girl looked Trump dead in the eye, not with anger, not with fear, but with a calm that comes only from knowing who you are and who your creator is. And she said, with no words, but with presence, with power, with a gaze that pierced through ego and arrogance, that her worth cannot be measured by applause or attention. And while the room tried to recover, while the men around him looked away, pretending to check their watches or sip their drinks, that moment became history. And ladies and gentlemen, history doesn't always wear armor or carry swords. Sometimes it wears a hijab and carries silence. And that silence can scream louder than speeches. Because what Trump didn't know was that the dance he was requesting wasn't denied, it was transformed. Because that girl's dignity became the rhythm. Her courage became the beat. Her faith became the choreography. And in a world that tries to turn values into performances, she turned performance into purpose. And purpose, ladies and gentlemen, that's the one thing they can never take from you unless you hand it over. Because while the world might dress lies as fashion, might sell dignity for views, might confuse confidence with exposure, that one moment when she stood still and said everything without a word became the fire that lit 1,000 hearts. And while they whispered about submission, she defined resistance. While they smirked at her silence, she sculpted thunder in the quiet. Because real strength is not in showing what they want, it's in standing for what they can't understand. And let me tell you, that's when it began, that ripple, that wave, that earthquake of spirit that rolled across continents, where Muslim girls in villages, in cities, in war zones, in schools, in shelters, in labs, in courts, in stadiums, stood up, not to dance for them, but to rise for themselves, to show the world that our values are not cages, they are wings. And we don't perform to be seen, we rise to be heard. And when you ask for a dance, what you're really asking for is a compromise, a collapse of conviction. But that girl, that one girl, without lifting a toe, without raising her voice, made every Muslim girl in the world raise her head just a little higher. Because, ladies and gentlemen, what they don't realize is that you don't need a stage when your soul is lit, and you don't need music when your mission sings louder than drums ever could. And the mission, ladies and gentlemen, is not to impress the eyes of men who lost their vision long ago, but to awaken the hearts of those who forgot what true honor looks like. Because that girl, in her silence, became a storm. Not a storm of noise, but of clarity, of unshakable truth. And across the globe, people began to whisper her name. Not because she entertained them, but because she reminded them that value is not in being consumed, it's in being complete. And soon that whisper became a chant, and that chant became a movement, not just for girls who cover their heads, but for every soul who's ever been told to sit down, to stay quiet, to blend in, because when she didn't dance, she danced. When she didn't sing, she roared. And that's when the news spread like wildfire, but not in headlines. No, the world doesn't honor silence with attention. It honors it with fear, because the powerful don't fear violence, they fear values. And when Donald Trump sat there thinking he was making a joke, what he actually did was spark a revolution. And that revolution didn't come with fire and fists. It came with books and beliefs, with calm eyes and covered hearts. And every step she didn't take became a path that millions followed. Because, ladies and gentlemen, in a world screaming for attention, the one who whispers purpose becomes the loudest voice of all. And when the dust settled, when the laughter faded, when the powerful turned off their microphones and stepped away from their stages, what remained wasn't the joke, wasn't the insult, wasn't the command for entertainment. It was the memory of a girl who refused to flinch, and that memory became a mirror that stared back at every soul who had ever doubted their worth, every parent who feared raising their daughter with values in a world built to strip them away, every teacher who hesitated to teach truth because the truth no longer fits the algorithm, and every young person who thought modesty meant weakness, because now they had proof that the strongest form of rebellion is to stay rooted. When the world tries to pull you out of the ground, and the internet, oh, it did what it always does. It twisted her story, turned it into memes, tried to laugh it off. But what they didn't realize is that you can't meme integrity, you can't joke away a legacy, you can't cancel the courage written in silence. And from that moment on, Muslim girls across the world didn't start dancing, they started dreaming bigger than stages, bolder than spotlights, because they saw that being unseen by the world sometimes means being seen more clearly by the one who matters most. And that's the point, ladies and gentlemen. The world wants to sell you mirrors made of lies, but she became the glass that showed people who they truly are. And when you know who you are, ladies and gentlemen, when your roots run deeper than their lies, when your faith is taller than their towers, then no request, no insult, no gaze, no staged invitation can bend your spine, because what that girl proved wasn't just resistance, it was resurrection, the revival of a mindset that had been quietly waiting for a spark, and her silence became that spark, igniting not anger but awakening, not revenge but reflection. Not rebellion, but resolve. Because the greatest battles are fought not on battlegrounds, but in boardrooms. Not with bullets, but with beliefs. Not with shouting, but with standing still. And while Trump may have forgotten the moment, the next day the world remembered it forever, because something changed, something clicked, and not just in the hearts of Muslim women, but in the eyes of their fathers, who now held their heads higher, in the voices of their mothers who walked with a little more pride, in the prayers of their brothers who understood that protecting her dignity is protecting the future. And ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you this, the true dance is not a feat, it's a faith, not choreographed by culture, but commanded by conviction. And when a girl refuses to be a puppet in someone else's circus, she becomes the ringleader of her own destiny. And destiny, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't arrive with permission slips or red carpets. It walks through fire, wrapped in silence, armed with principles, untouched by applause. And when that girl denied a man with the power to shake nations, she reminded the world that no man, no matter how loud his name echoes, can demand a soul to dance when that soul bows only to God. And that's when the fear began, not in her heart, but in theirs, in the hearts of those who thrive on who feed on insecurity, who disguise oppression with opportunity, Because when a girl like her rises in values, she becomes untouchable. And untouchable people terrify the systems built to exploit the weak. So they attacked her with headlines, mocked her on screens, but none of it pierced her. Because when Allah writes your protection, no insult can scratch it, no force can break it. And now that moment lives on, not as a scandal, but as a symbol, a banner held high by millions who now know that dignity doesn't tremble, it triumphs. That silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. And while he asked for a performance, what he got was a proclamation, a warning sent to every stage, every camera, every room that says, we are not here for your pleasure. We are here with purpose. We are not decoration. We are declaration. And the day you confuse us for ornaments will be the day the world remembers what real power looks like. And real power, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't need an introduction, doesn't need to scream, doesn't ask for followers or validation. It just exists, unbothered, undeniable, unshaken. And that girl, with her silence louder than any speech, stood like a verse from a holy book that even time itself couldn't erase. And in that stillness, she crushed centuries of stereotypes in a single heartbeat. Because when the world says, dance for me, and you answer with discipline, you shake the very ground those requests stand on. And what they don't realize is that modesty isn't restriction, it's rebellion in a world that sells exposure as empowerment. And she became the proof that you don't need to uncover to be powerful. You don't need to move your body to move mountains, because faith, when firm, makes even the arrogant blink, makes even the shameless pause. And while they laughed in that moment, they didn't realize they were witnessing the beginning of something eternal, something generational, something divine, because that girl didn't just refuse her requests. She redefined an entire narrative. And from that point on, the world saw that no matter how powerful a man may be, if he lacks respect, then he lacks everything. And no matter how silent a girl may be, if she has faith, then she has everything. And everything, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't come from fame or fortune or followers. It comes from knowing who you are when no one is watching and when the world watches with twisted eyes, hoping to break you, hoping to expose you, hoping to see you fold. That's when the brave rise, not with rage, but with reason, not with noise, but with nobility. And that girl didn't become a trend. She became a torch. And across borders and languages and walls, her silence became sacred because it whispered louder than protests. It preached louder than platforms. And it pierced deeper than politics. Because when she stood still in a room expecting submission, she declared war without violence. She proved that identity isn't something you borrow, it's something you carry. And her refusal wasn't defiance, it was devotion to something bigger, something higher. And when you choose purpose over popularity, you don't lose the world, you remind the world of what it lost. And in that moment, every girl watching, every parent worried, every believer silent found courage, not in what she said, but in what she didn't say. Because, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the loudest statement is to stand still while the world spins in circles. And in doing so, she made history not by dancing, but by not dancing. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as we close this chapter, not with applause or spectacle, but with silent strength, remember this: true courage is not in bending to the will of others, but in standing firm when the world demands you break. True power is not measured by how loud you can shout, but by how peacefully you can hold your ground. And that girl who refused to dance on command showed us all that dignity cannot be bought, respect cannot be forced, and honor cannot be compromised. And if we carry that lesson forward, if we hold on to that flame, then we don't just change the narrative, we change the world. Because sometimes the greatest revolutions come not with a roar, but with a quiet refusal to be anything less than who we were born to be. And so I leave you with this, ladies and gentlemen: stand tall, speak truth, live your purpose, and never, ever let anyone dictate your worth. Because in the end, your silence might just be the loudest legacy you leave behind.